We do have a quorum. I'll start the meeting in about 1 minute. Good morning, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. I would like to now call this meeting to order. We'll begin by welcoming some new members to the TPC. Tyler Pace is a new business member on the Transportation Policy Committee, appointed by the Speaker of the House. Welcome, Tyler. I'd also like to welcome Councilmember Mark Stewart as the representative for the City of Chandler. And congratulations to Mayor Julia Wheatley on being elected mayor of the town of Queen Creek. Lastly, I would like to recognize and thank Councilmember Schaefer for his service to the TPC on behalf of the City of Peoria, and we wish him all the best. Okay, we'll now begin. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. If you're participating by Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table in the hallway and give it to MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available for MAG staff. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members.
Thank you, Chair. When I call your name, please indicate you are present for the record. Rock Arnett.
Present.
Thank you. David Barry. Doug DeCluson.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Gallego. Mayor Giles.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councilmember Littlefield. Cheryl Lombard. Councilmember Manfredi.
Present.
Thank you.
Present, sorry.
Thank you. Jackie Meck. Mayor Orsborn.
Present.
Thank you. Tyler Pace.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Peterson. Thank you. Mark Reardon. Thank you. Councilmember Schaefer. Councilmember Stewart.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Stipp.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Wires. Thank you. Mayor Weiss.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wheatley. Thank you. Mayor Woods.
Here.
Thank you. And Chair Sellers.
Present.
Thank you. Is there anyone I have missed? Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is if asking you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our next item is call to the audience. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda items unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. Have we received any requests to speak cards?
Chair, no requests to speak cards were received for this item.
MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website 1 hour prior to the meeting. Staff, do we have any written comments for this item?
Chair, no public comments have been received for this item or any item on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next item is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 4A through 4C are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Prior to the approval of the consent agenda, do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on any items on consent?
Chair, no public comments have been received for this item.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve consent agenda items 4A through 4C?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion from Eric Osborne and a second from Stipp. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, do we need to do a roll call for people on the phone?
Thank you, Chair. When I call your name, please indicate how you vote. Rock Arnett,
I vote yes.
thank you. Doug DeClusen,
Aye.
thank you. Mayor Hall,
Aye.
thank you. Councilmember Littlefield. Councilmember Manfredi,
Aye.
thank you. Mayor Weiss,
Aye.
thank you. Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Item number 5 is on the agenda for discussion of the regional freeway project and program changes. This will be presented by John Bullen, MAG Transportation Funding Policy Program Manager. And this item is for information and discussion. John?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of TPC. Very happy to be here today. As the chairman had indicated, this item is on your agenda just for discussion today. Next slide, please. I'll begin today's discussion by providing a little bit of background. We do have several new members, so important to provide some context there in terms of how the program itself functions, what its purpose is. From there, I'll touch briefly on our current program, the 2023 program, and finally get into the bulk of the conversation, which is how to handle some of these freeway projects moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'll start with background. Next slide. So as part of the Proposition 400 program, when legislation was passed and that was ultimately successful at the ballot, revenues were distributed between 3 different programs. 56.2% of Prop 400 revenues are distributed to the freeway program, 33 1/3 are distributed to the transit program, and 10.5% are distributed to the arterial program. Those revenues that are distributed to the freeway program are managed through what we call the Freeway Lifecycle Program. The Freeway Lifecycle Program is one of the 3 programs. Really, its purpose is to ensure that we comply with state statute that requires our expenditures be in balance with our projected revenues. So this life cycle concept, in effect, represents a box where we identify all available revenues and we match those to projected expenditures to make sure that we are in balance through the term of the half-cent sales tax, which runs through December 31st, 2025. Every year, we go through a fairly lengthy approval process. Most of that occurs behind the scenes, but of course, we do take the program for action to this committee and to regional council towards the end of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the freeway program, we're actually talking about more than just the dedicated half-cent sales tax. There's two other primary revenue streams that flow into the program itself. While the half-cent sales tax represents a very critically important component of it, we are reliant on these other sources as well. We do receive a portion of the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund, or HERF, that flows directly into the program. This allocation in relative terms is modest. However, it is very important. And then one item that I particularly want to focus on is we get a fairly significant share of the federal funding that flows directly to the state. It's totals approximately $400 to $450 million a year. It is not a small amount. Also want to provide some important context. As we look outside of Maricopa County, the rest of the state is entirely dependent mostly on this federal funding, and then a small portion of the HERF funding that largely just serves as project match. So we're fortunate in this region to have the dedicated half-cent sales tax that really has enabled the investments we see to date and continues to play a critically important role in our freeway program. However, with the federal funding, one of the themes that you'll see as part of today's presentation is federal funding is allocated on a use or lose basis. Now, when we're talking half-cent sales tax or HERF, we can hold on to that money year over year. If we want to let that build up for a project, for instance, or if there's a project that we expect to go this fiscal year that slips, we can keep that money in the bank. Federal funding is all use or lose. We have a certain amount of federal funding we have to use. That funding has to get out the door by the end of the year, or we lose it as a state to other states around the country. We have done a tremendous job of making sure that does not happen. However, it does create a challenge, particularly in the times of uncertainty. Next slide, please. So first, to touch on the annual update process. As I had noted, this is a complex process. There's a lot that goes into it. We work hand in hand with our partners at the Arizona Department of Transportation, who are the implementers of the program itself. Twice a year, we go through a robust process where we generate new project updates. As we work on some of the project engineering, some of the project planning, there's normal changes throughout the course of a year. So we need to take these into account. We need to reflect them as part of our annual update process. We also have a robust process for forecasting our revenues, both our half-cent sales tax, our HERF revenues, as well as federal funding. What we do is we ultimately combine these two together. We see where the program shakes out. We see where projects are. We, of course, identify projects that we might want to advance. And then it's like putting together a puzzle where we fit together these pieces. That traditionally occurs right about now. And ultimately, we submit that for an air quality conformity process to make sure that our plans comply with the requirements of the EPA and the Clean Air Act. And it concludes with the approval process. Next slide, please. So we are at a unique time, a time that we haven't seen for a number of years, and that's because we are approaching the end of the Proposition 400 program. The sales tax ends December 31st, 2025. While that seems like a long ways away in transportation terms, that is right around the corner. That presents a big challenge for us and a big challenge for managing uncertainty. Next slide, please. This is a slide for those of you that were with us in the fall. You'll recall from our presentation where we detailed the impacts of the veto. Under normal circumstances, what we find is desirable is certainty. So as we have been putting together our freeway program, we have assumed an extension of the half-cent sales tax. That allows us to continue project development activities. That allows us to get projects queued up. again, when we're talking about federal funds, we have to make sure those federal funds get out the door. And of course, we want to deliver infrastructure as quickly as possible because that infrastructure provides a huge benefit. Unfortunately, with the veto on July 6th, we've moved into this next tier, this tier of uncertainty. While we're all optimistic, we're working tirelessly at ensuring there's an extension of Prop 400. We're dealing with a situation that we've never dealt with before. We don't know how that's going to shake out. And as a result, there are some potential impacts to projects and things that we need to be considerate of as we put together our freeway program. And then, of course, what we hope we never get to is the no extension scenario, which would have catastrophic consequences on the transportation system. Next slide, please. So I want to begin today's presentation by just giving you a brief overview of our current fiscal year 2023 program. Next slide. So the fiscal year 2023 program was approved by the MAG Regional Council back in May 25th, 2022. This program guides the allocation of funding, the projects left in the Proposition 400 program through the end of the tax. Of course, some of those projects do extend beyond the life of the tax, but really it allocates the remaining balance of the funding that we have. Next slide, please. To date, we currently have 5 projects under construction. It includes the I-17 widening in the north part of the valley. This is a critically important statewide project. You hear a lot of discussion. It's to add an additional lane between Anthem and Sunset Point, an additional lane up the hill. Maricopa County, through the Prop 400 program, we actually have funding allocated to this project. That funding was critical in making sure that ADOT was able to continue forward with that project. And yet another example of how the dedicated half-cent sales tax here in Maricopa County really provides a statewide benefit. That project, when we were facing a decrease in revenues from COVID, was certainly on the line to get cut. It's the Prop 400 funding that kept that alive and allowed ADOT to go secure additional federal revenues. We also have projects to construct new interchanges at 43rd and 51st Avenues needed to support the new TSMC expansion. Those projects are being developed in rapid time, again, thanks to Prop 400, and are set to be open later this year for the initial opening of that facility. We have widening out in the far West Valley in City of Buckeye to provide much needed congestion relief there. A drainage project along I-17 that'll greatly help cross traffic. And of course, I-10 Broadway Curve, the state's largest ever reconstruction project. Next slide, please. We have an additional 10 projects that are currently under development. One of these projects, the Loop 101 Princess Deshay widening in Scottsdale, is set to go to construction later this year. But as you can see, there are a number of projects that we've been working on behind the scenes to make sure that they're in a position to be able to be delivered through the Proposition 400 program. Next slide. But really today's presentation is meant to focus on those projects that we had flagged after the veto that were potentially placed at risk because we have moved into this paradigm of uncertainty. And so today's presentations wanted to talk through what our proposal is for these projects so that we can make sure we get those updates included as part of the 2024 Freeway Lifecycle Program. Next slide, please. So I'll go through the proposed approach. Next slide. And I'll first start with the I-10 widening between 202 and Riggs Road. Next slide. So this is a project that we have funded for construction in fiscal year 2025. Between Loop 202 and Riggs Road, we have committed to a project scope of adding 1 general purpose lane and 1 HOV lane in each direction. So again, providing much needed congestion relief to that portion of the valley. We have also committed to reconstructing the interchange at I-10 and State Route 347. Those that travel to and from Maricopa know that this is a huge bottleneck. It creates safety issues. So we're actively designing that, and we have funding set aside for the reconstruction. Moreover, we are actively designing improvements to the I-10 Wild Horse Pass interchange. Funding for this interchange has been allocated as part of the extension of Proposition 400 This is another important project to provide improved connectivity to and from the Gila River Indian community. Next slide, please. So of course, you see the limits on this project, and you've probably heard a lot of the discussion about the larger statewide effort to widen I-10. So currently, the section of I-10 between Loop 202 in the Valley and State Route 387 is the last portion of I-10 between Phoenix and Tucson that has not been widened from its original 2-lane configuration. This is a project that we have been working very hard on. We have a tremendous amount of staff resources allocated to this project, working hand in hand with our partners at Gila River Indian Community, as well as at ADOT. We expect that we will finish the design concept report, the environmental work in spring of this year. And I do want to emphasize too, that the funding we have allocated as part of the Prop 400 program has been an essential component of this project. In fact, the DCR, the environmental work that we anticipate to complete later this spring would not have happened had we not had Prop 400 program funding programmed for this project to really initiate and kick efforts off. Next slide, please. However, as you're aware, and there's been a lot of discussion at the state level as well as the federal level, we do not have enough funding to completely finish the project. You can see here the total estimate to complete the entire widening itself, as well as some of those interchange improvements that are needed, is estimated at $957 million. In total, when we add up the total amount of funding available, we are currently at $803 million. So there's approximately a $150 million shortfall between what we have allocated for this project and what the anticipated cost is. Now, I will flag that we continue to work on ADOT to refine these numbers. ADOT has worked to try and understand what funding is actually available to them. So it's possible that from a statewide funding perspective, those numbers might change slightly. But this does give an order of magnitude overview of what funding we actually need to complete the corridor. Next slide, please.
Yeah, John, let me just comment right there that we do have the support of our 2 U.S. senators trying to get us more federal dollars to complete that, based on the need for safety improvements and just general traffic flow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. That's a great point. If we can back up one slide too. ADOT did put in for a federal discretionary grant last cycle. Unfortunately, they were not successful. There's been a lot of commentary to that effect, but as Chairman Sellers has pointed out, our Senate and really the entire congressional delegation has been a tremendous supporters to secure that funding. I think it also reflects the reality, however, this discretionary funding, the increased discretionary funding, has been a real big help when it comes to delivering transportation infrastructure, but the needs are so high across the nation that alone the federal dollars are not enough to deliver these critically important projects. Simply put, the amount of requests for the funding that ADOT sought for this I-10 widening were 3 to 4 times larger than the available funding. So again, as we discuss the extension of Prop 400, as we discuss the need to secure some additional revenue streams, we have to continue to bring local funding to the table. Federal discretionary funding alone is not enough to deliver these investments. Next slide, please. So following the veto, a lot of discussion about whether or not the region should continue to commit our $220 million towards this project. Certainly without the successful grant application, it calls into question ADOT's ability to deliver the whole facility. However, working closely with Gila River Indian Community, working closely with the governor's office, members of the state legislature, we feel that there is a really good possibility of securing additional dollars, whether that be through state appropriations, whether that be through a federal discretionary grant, or more than likely a combination of the both. So our proposal is for the program that we continue to commit funding for the project, and again, work with our partners to try and secure the additional funding needed. Next slide. Mr. Chairman, unless there's further questions on I-10, I'm happy to move to the next project, the Loop 303 extension. Next slide, please. So in the Prop 400 program, we do have funding allocated to extend Loop 303 from its current termini at approximately Van Buren, just south of the I-10 facility, further down to ultimately provide connectivity with MC 85. As part of the current design efforts, that connectivity is slated to be an interim connection with Cotton Lane. So travelers would get off MC 85 at Cotton Lane, travel north, and eventually connect into the Loop 303. The Loop 303 extension, really the utility of that facility, is to provide that connectivity with that future State Route 30 center segment. There's a lot of freight movement in particular that is projected to go down the 303, travel over to the 30, and take that to the South Mountain Freeway. So we do have funding allocated to construct improvements from Van Buren to approximately Lower Buckeye, and that would construct a 3-lane in each direction facility. Next slide, please. Really, as I had mentioned, the biggest benefit of that Loop 303 South extension is that connectivity with State Route 30. So certainly the veto was very impactful. As we look at the future, as we look at the need for State Route 30, we are dependent on the extension of Proposition 400 to deliver that facility. As a result, following the veto, we worked closely with our partners at ADOT to try and identify possible alternatives. And really there were two goals. Number one, how do we design or how can we construct a facility that could potentially serve as a long-term end of freeway condition? Again, not knowing when we'll have the extension of Proposition 400 in place and when that connection to State Route 30 will be built. Also, we wanted to improve regional connectivity. Again, we wanted to make sure that we can get vehicles from facilities that carry higher volumes of traffic onto the freeway system. Next slide, please. So fortunately, we were able to come up with a concept that accomplished both those goals. So what our proposal is actually to use a portion of that ultimate Loop 303 State Route 30 ramp, accelerate its construction so that it would happen today, and provide an interim connection to MC 85. Really what we would be doing is transitioning from the freeway to more of an arterial style road, however, with no additional access to connect into MC 85. Next slide, please. And this does a couple of things. Really, it helps from a regional traffic standpoint. We see volumes on the Loop 303 extension with this connection to MC 85 would be quite impressive, even in the short term. So again, it provides important regional connectivity, allows people to travel who are coming up on State Route 85 or out in the Buckeye area with a direct connection to Loop 303. Moreover, there's really very limited throwaway, so to speak, with this option or infrastructure that we wouldn't use over long term. All we're doing is actually accelerating part of the State Route 30 connection that will ultimately be built. So specifically, we'll construct the southbound to eastbound ramp, what will ultimately be that connection, but will function as an arterial road in the short term. Next slide, please. So Mr. Chair, unless there's questions on that, I'll move to State Route 30. Next slide. So State Route 30, again, is a widely talked about project, critically important. We need this to relieve congestion on I-10. This is a facility that we need as quickly as possible. Due to the cost of the facility, which is well north of $2 billion, we don't have enough funding as part of the Prop 400 program to construct it. However, a decision was made by this body a number of years ago to instead focus funding on prepping the corridor for construction so that when we do secure the extension of Prop 400, we can move very quickly. One of the reasons we did that is because of the complexities associated with the corridor itself. There are a lot of right-of-way parcels that need to be required, and there are some very complex parcels as well. We're talking dairies, we're talking sand and gravel pits. These are items that take years to ultimately acquire and relocate. Moreover, there's some extremely complex utility work that needs to be done throughout the corridor. This includes encasing a water line that flows to and from the Palo Verde nuclear generating plant in concrete. That can only occur on a very limited schedule and will take a long time to do. There are also some high voltage power lines that have to be relocated. And again, that's not something that can occur overnight. Next slide, please. So as part of the Prop 400 program, we've allocated more than $550 million for those initial development activities. Through fiscal year 2022, we have actually expended or obligated nearly $340 million for that work. ADOT has done a tremendous job of moving this corridor along and getting it ready for quick construction. Unfortunately, we are now in the circumstance where our enabling legislation was vetoed and our future or our ability to construct State Route 30 is in doubt until we have a clear path to the ballot. We have approximately $213 million left. Next slide, please. So what our proposed action is that we continue to move forward with the utility work. Again, this is extremely complex work. It will take a number of years, and there's no catching up if we miss the timelines set forth. There's only so many times a year we can do this encasement. There's only so many times a year we can do some of the high voltage power line relocation work. For the right-of-way, we propose that we continue to move forward with right-of-way acquisitions, but we be more considerate, more conservative, and more deliberate about what acquisitions take place. Specifically, focus mostly on the easternmost segment of the corridor and focus on those properties that are complex and take a long lead time. Again, our objective is to minimize any potential disruption and be able to move the facility along as quickly as possible if and when we're able to secure the extension of Prop 400. Next slide, please. Moving on to the last two projects, which are improvements at I-10 and Baseline in the East Valley and I-10 and Jackrabbit in the West Valley. Next slide, please. So we had previously allocated funding to initiate some of the development work for both of these projects. Again, the intent was to get projects queued up so that with a successful extension of Proposition 400, we had projects that could move quickly into construction. Again, we're also mindful of being able to make sure that our federal funding that's obligated to the region can be obligated and that we do not risk losing any funds to other states. Construction for both of these projects is funded in phase one of the Prop 400 extension program. And we have already began scoping and environmental work with funding that was appropriated in 2022. Next slide, please. So the timelines on the screen give a very conservative estimate for project delivery. Rest assured, Mayor Orsborn, this represents a worst case scenario. We believe that there's opportunity to accelerate some of the final design, some of the utility work, such that construction could conceivably happen as early as 2025. So really what our approach is, what we found is that when ADOT went out and advertised the preliminary design for both of these projects, cost came in way less than they anticipated. So we actually have available funding. And what we're proposing that we do is use that available funding and program it on final design. Next slide, please. If we program it on final design and take both of these projects through 100% plans, that would give us a situation where we have shovel-ready projects. If we get the extension of Proposition 400 in place, this is no issue. We can move seamlessly to these projects. If we fail to get the extension of Prop 400 or there's an additional delay, it gives us another release valve, another opportunity to put funding on these projects. And again, ensure that we don't lose federal funding from the region. Really what we're trying to do is a tightrope act where we manage our current program, make sure we have projects queued up, make sure that we don't lose any federal funding, but be abundantly conservative given the time of uncertainty we're in. So again, our proposal is that we take both of these projects through final design. Next slide. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's a lot. I'm sure there's some specific questions on some of these projects. Would be more than happy to provide additional detail.
Thank you, John. Excuse me. And I'll just start by saying that many of us have been working tirelessly on trying to ensure that we're going to get the extension of Prop 400 as soon as possible. And I think one of the areas that has been misunderstood is timing. You know, there are people in our state government that feel that because this doesn't expire till 2025, we have time. They don't understand how this system works. Marty Schultz had a meeting with Senator Farnsworth last week and invited me to attend, and I did that. And the two main things we tried to ensure that the senator understood is that timing is absolutely critical, that we need to have something, we need to have the ability to put this on the ballot, hopefully this year, or we really lose some momentum on these projects. The other thing that I tried to emphasize to him is that if we don't have transit in this plan, and we put a plan without transit out to the voters, it will not pass. Bottom line, it cannot pass. Hopefully we succeeded in communicating that. We spent over an hour with him. But you know, we keep getting other news that like TSMC now is saying they are planning to expand beyond $40 billion. But yet what they're telling me is we don't have the infrastructure in place to support what they're doing already. So, you know, it just makes everything we're doing even more time critical. And we're certainly doing everything we know how to get it done and engaging every organization that we know of that we feel could help us at the same time. Any comments, questions from the group? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, thank you very much for today's presentation. Obviously, this discussion about the 303 extension is critical to the city of Goodyear. Obviously, today is an opportunity for me to really be on the record to state how important that is for us as a city and for us as a region, that we complete that Loop 303 southbound extension that is currently funded through Prop 400. I cannot stress enough to my fellow committee members the number of resident complaints that we have in the area. Part of it is due to our building a city around a potential freeway that was supposed to come through a number of years ago, and with rebalancing, et cetera, we've been very patient and waiting, and our residents have been as well. And again, I just want to stress how important this is. We've built a significant portion of our city around this idea that the freeway will actually come through that area. Goodyear and the Southwest Valley as a whole, particularly our partners to the west in the city of Buckeye, we've been real good regional partners waiting for these things to come through. Obviously, the veto of Prop 400 was kind of a gut punch to all of us, but we really cannot afford to wait and do anything different with this particular project. As everyone may recall, that this was supposed to connect to the SR30, which John, just showed us. The idea of bringing it to MC85 is a really positive outcome from a very bad situation. MC85 in that part of the valley is becoming more and more a east-west thoroughfare, and getting the 303 down to MC85 really brings connectivity between the city of Buckeye, the city of Goodyear, which then extends into the city of Avondale, et cetera. So I just want to thank everyone for your support of this particular project, and just emphasize to you how important this was to us. And I really appreciate, John, you and the staff here at MAG and your work at finding a solution to what was potentially a very bad outcome. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, certainly one of the things that became very apparent to me after serving on the State Transportation Board is that people don't really look at our municipalities and our areas. They look at a system that works. And so it really is important to have all these pieces to have a system that works. And, the other end of the 303 that intersects with I-17 is going to be another problem with TSMC's work that's going on. So we really need to stay focused. Other comments, questions? Seeing none. Anybody online? Okay, thank you, John.
Yep.
Okay, next we're going to have a legislative update from our Government Relations Director, Nathan Pryor, and I understand he's going to do this on the web.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Apologize, I'm a bit under the weather this week, so bear with me in case my voice gives out. Just regarding some earlier comments on the I-10 project through Gila River Indian Community, and to your comment, Mr. Chairman, regarding the mega grant status and the need for funding for that project, I was able to attend a conference, the National Association of Regional Councils, last month in Washington, D.C. And while I was there, I took time for visits to congressional offices, and the I-10 project and the funding need was the first priority issue that I was able to share with Senators Kelly and Sinema, their offices, as well as a number of House offices, really delivering that message, looking for their support. They are fully aware and appreciate conversations with you and other member agencies and drawing attention to that need for that facility. I'll also like to mention a thank you to Governor Stephen Roe Lewis of the Gila River Indian Community for his continued messaging on the importance of I-10 improvements and the need for funding. So I just want to cover that before I jump into my slides. Next slide, please.
Well, and I will mention that we did get a letter from both Senator Kelly and Sinema to the Secretary, stressing the importance of getting this done and asking to have it considered.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. Appreciate that. Regarding Senator Kelly, he is introducing, if he hasn't done so already, his Highway Formula Modernization Act. He introduced this in the last Congress. This is an issue we've been reporting on for a number of years, and it's been a subject of our recently updated federal issue papers, which you can see on that slide. I had an opportunity again to meet with Senator Kelly's staff in January last month to discuss this and other issues. So a little bit of background on this. More than 90% of federal highway assistance is distributed to states through 8 formula programs. Historically, Congress has determined formula factors for each individual program and updated the formula factors in each surface transportation reauthorization bill. However, going back to the MAP 21, moving ahead for progress in the 21st century, which was enacted in July of 2012. So here, some almost a decade plus going on now, Congress opted to base state apportionment solely on the state's share from the prior year and the amount of taxes paid into the Highway Trust Fund. So what does that mean? That means that apart from the changes in the gas tax, each state's federal apportionment continues to be based on funding formula created in Safety Lieu, which was the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill enacted in 2005. And that uses population data from the 2000 census and the state's total lane miles of federal aid highway from 2007. So what this is saying is there's a number of formula factors that are very old now. Some are over 20 years old. 2000 census, obviously, fast-growing states like Arizona, our fast-growing region, we simply cannot be tied to these old formula factors. We need an updating of this. So what will this legislation do? This act would require a study to consider, among other things, how funding allocations would change based on the latest available data, such as population and federal aid highway road miles. So what's next? First off, thank you to Senator Kelly, his co-sponsor, Senator Cruz, for introducing this. Senator Cruz, obviously from Texas, Sun Belt states, Intermountain West states, fast-growing states. There needs to be a point of correction in updating these federal formula factors. So please, if you're having conversations with Senator Kelly and his staff, please thank him for his support on this effort. We've also reached out to our metropolitan planning organization peers in the Intermountain West. Again, fast-growing states, we're encouraging that they reach out to their respective congressional offices and request that they consider being a co-sponsor on this legislation. We'll provide updates as developments occur on this front. Next slide, please. Of course, Proposition 400, much of our attention is on that. Senate Bill 1122, much attention this week on Monday. And to introduce form, that legislation, among other things, would have allocated 5% for transit, down from the over 40% in the adopted regional transportation plan. Simply an unworkable bill in its introduced form. On Monday, we saw a number of amendments to this proposed, all of which failed. I'd like to thank and acknowledge our Regional Council Chair, Mayor Weiss, who spoke at the Senate Transportation and Technology Committee on Monday. Thank you, Mayor Weiss, for carrying our message and speaking to the issues associated with SB 1122. Ultimately, that legislation failed in committee on a 3-4 vote. We cannot underscore our gratitude for Senator Carroll, Vice Chair of that committee, for voting against this bill. And we're making a request of our member agencies that you please reach out to Senator Carroll and indicate your appreciation for him stepping up to defeat this bill in committee. I cannot underscore that enough. Please reach out to Senator Carroll and thank him for his work on this. Senator Carroll was a sponsor of the House version of our Prop 400 extension legislative efforts, and I must acknowledge our now new TPC member, then Senator Pace, and his significant involvement in advancing our legislative efforts last year. Thank you, Senator Pace, for your work last year. So what's next? Very fluid, dynamic situation. There's a special House Transportation Committee meeting being called this Friday morning, this upcoming Friday morning at 9 a.m. We're tracking developments on this. We'll provide members updates as needed. Also, not to lose sight of it, we have been in conversation with the governor's office. So they've been very productive. They've indicated their support in our efforts. So we'll continue to keep them apprised of our efforts. And again, thank them for their support as well. Mr. Chairman, a lot going on, but with that, I'll complete my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nathan. Any questions for Nathan? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nathan, this isn't really a question for you. I think it's just for everybody's information. What I'm understanding is Senator Carroll has now received the tip of the torch, if you will, from the rest of his peers. So I think showing Senator Carroll our appreciation and support would be really important right now, especially since he's feeling a little isolated from his peers. So I think he really went out on a limb, and I think we should make sure that we show him that appreciation.
Mr. Chair, it's Ken Weiss.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
To Bill's point, I called Frank the afternoon after I testified. As soon as he voted no, I think it was the second time around, Nathan, and correct me, the chair of that committee pulled Frank's bills for the rest of the day. So he is under fire, and hopefully we can get his phone number, email out to all the members, and he's going to need our support going forward. And I think that's something that we need to do with everyone. Senator Marsh was incredible in her questioning and her pushback on this on 1122, and anything we can do to help support the people that support us, I think, is important.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Are there any requests from the membership for an item on a future agenda? Are there any comments or announcements from any of the members?
Mr. Chair, Ken Weiss again. I think it's probably public knowledge right now that executive committee on Monday voted to forward on a recommendation as a successor for Eric Anderson and to work side by side with Eric as we transition to Eric's retirement date. And that person is Ed Zerker. So regional council will be voting on that next week, but I just want to make the committee aware.
Oh, thank you very much, Mayor. Okay. Any other questions, comments? This meeting is adjourned.